You were sort of rude to her on the phone. What's the matter? Don't you like her?
If she were a bug, it sure would be fun to step on her.
My three sons. They were the family America trusted. For over a decade, my three sons offered comfort, laughter, and a vision of stability in an increasingly unstable world. It was television at its most wholesome, a widowed father raising three boys with heart and humor. But behind the warmth of primetime perfection, the actors who brought that world to life were fighting battles the audience never saw. Alcoholism, terminal illness, emotional distance, and untimely death shadowed the off-screen lives of those beloved faces. Fred McMurray smiled like the ideal father, but negotiated a contract that allowed him to vanish from the set. William Frolley played the wisecracking grandfather while walking a tightrope between redemption and relapse. Don Grady, the heartthrob's son, spent his post-fame years quietly fighting a disease that would take his life too soon. One by one, the cast disappeared, some in silence, some in pain, but all leaving behind a trail of heartbreak that starkly contrasts with the laughter they gave us. This isn't just a tribute. It's an unflinching look at what really happened to 8 of the show's most cherished stars. Their stories don't end when the credits roll. In fact, that's where the real drama begins. Fred McMurray, the man who played America's father, but died a stranger. He gave America the image of strength, stability, and stoic kindness. As Steve Douglas on My Three Sons, Fred McMurray became the blueprint for the perfect single father, a man who kept his family afloat with quiet wisdom and unwavering calm. But behind that soft-spoken charm was someone very different. He wasn't a man who opened up. He was a man who made sure no one ever got too close. Born on August 30th, 1908, in Kankakee, Illinois, McMurray didn't stumble into fame. He built it carefully, brick by brick, starting as a saxophonist before becoming one of Hollywood's most bankable film stars. He worked with legends, scored iconic roles, and even inspired the look of the comic book hero Captain Marvel. But Fred's most unforgettable role came in 1960, when he stepped into television and took command of My Three Sons, on screen and off. He wasn't just the lead, he was the power behind the scenes. He negotiated a contract so airtight it made him a ghost on set. All his scenes were filmed in advance over just 65 days a year. The rest of the cast acted opposite stand-ins. McMurray was rarely present, rarely involved, and rarely vulnerable. That smile? It was work. That warmth? Carefully managed. He was more businessman than actor, more figurehead than father. And yet, he was beloved. Viewers never saw the walls. They believed the illusion, because that's what Fred wanted. No scandals, no drama, just distance. Even as illness crept in, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, sepsis, pneumonia, he said little. When he died on November 5th, 1991, at age 83 in Santa Monica, it was the quiet exit he always planned. No fanfare, no spotlight, just silence. Fred McMurray wasn't the man we thought he was. He was something more complicated, more guarded, and perhaps more tragic. He gave the world a father to believe in, then walked away without ever letting us know who he really was. William Frolley, the cranky grandfather who died alone on the sidewalk. He was loud, sarcastic, and impossible to ignore. As Bub O'Casey on My Three Sons, William Frolley brought grit and bite to a show built on sweetness. But behind the grumpy charm was a man who wasn't acting. He was Bub, and he didn't care who liked it. Born February 26, 1887, in Burlington, Iowa, Frolley spent decades clawing his way through vaudeville, Broadway, and finally, Hollywood. By the time he landed his most iconic role as Fred Mertz in I Love Lucy, he had appeared in over 100 films. He was already a legend, but a damaged one. A notorious drinker with a brutal temper, Frolley was blacklisted from most studios. When he lobbied Desi Arnaz for the role on Lucy, he was warned, "Show up drunk once, and you're gone." He never did. Not once. He knew it was his last shot. After Lucy ended, Frolley wasn't ready to disappear. He joined My Three Sons, playing the irritable grandfather who anchored the show's early seasons. But by 1965, it was clear he couldn't keep up. His memory was slipping. His health was deteriorating. Quietly, the producers made a decision. They couldn't risk the pace of production. He wasn't fired in scandal, but he was replaced. Politely, officially, it was retirement. In truth, it was the end. Just a year later, on March 3, 1966, Frolley collapsed while walking alone on Hollywood Boulevard after leaving a movie. He was 79. There were no friends by his side. No final words. Just a body on the pavement. A man who had made America laugh for decades, dying alone under the bright lights of the city that never truly embraced him. He left no children, no legacy of warmth, only reruns and regret. William Frolley was unforgettable on screen because he was impossible in real life. And when he was gone, Hollywood didn't mourn. It moved on. William Demerest, the replacement who outlived the legacy. He wasn't the first choice. He wasn't the sentimental favorite. But when William Frolley's body began to fail him, the producers turned to William Demerest, a man who didn't come to set to make friends, only to work. And that's exactly what he did. For 7 seasons, Demerest played Uncle Charlie, the gruff but dependable sea captain who became the second heart of my 3 sons. He never tried to imitate Frolley. He didn't have to. He brought his own storm to the family, and it worked. Born February 27, 1892, in St. Paul, Minnesota, Demerest had been in the game longer than most people had been alive. Vaudeville, Broadway, silent films, and eventually sound. He lived through every evolution of the industry. Known for his deadpan fury and explosive timing, he was the go-to guy when a scene needed to snap. In the 1940s, he became part of director Preston Sturges's unofficial stock company, delivering unforgettable performances in Sullivan's Travels and The Miracle of Morgan's Creek. He was nominated for an Oscar in The Jolson Story, but never won. It didn't matter. He wasn't in it for trophies. He was in it for the craft. When he joined My 3 Sons in 1965, he was already in his 70s, but you wouldn't have known it. He showed up, hit his mark, delivered his lines with bite, and left. No drama. No excuses. While Fred McMurray filmed his scenes in batches and disappeared, Demerest stayed. He was the one the other actors saw. The one who grounded them in reality while the star floated above it. He worked until his body said no. On December 28, 1983, William Demerest died in Palm Springs of pneumonia and prostate cancer. He was 91. Most people didn't notice. There was no wave of grief, no glowing retrospectives. But the truth is, Demerest didn't need fanfare. He had already outlived the legacy. While others faded under the weight of nostalgia, he simply endured. He wasn't the heart of the show, but he was its spine. Don Grady, the golden boy who grew up and disappeared. He had the face of a teen idol, the voice of a musician, and the eyes of someone who saw too much too soon. As Robbie Douglas on My 3 Sons, Don Grady was the heartthrob, funny, kind, and impossibly perfect. Girls adored him. Magazines couldn't get enough of him. But fame at 16 is a dangerous thing. And for Don, the spotlight never felt like home. It felt like a cage. Born Don Luis Agradi on June 8, 1944, in San Diego, California, he was already a Mouseketeer by age 11. When he joined My 3 Sons in 1960, he was barely out of childhood. For over a decade, he played the middle son, growing up in front of the nation's eyes. But behind that charming smile, Grady was restless. He loved music more than acting. And as the show aged, so did his frustration. He didn't want to be Robbie forever. By 1971, he had enough. Grady left the series before its final season, quietly, without scandal, just a slow fade into the background. Hollywood didn't chase him. He didn't chase it back. Instead, he turned to composition, writing scores for Lifetime and the Discovery Channel, touring with a sunshine pop band called Yellow Balloon, and recording music that few people knew even existed. He didn't need to be famous. He just wanted to create. But fame has a long memory, and when Grady was diagnosed with cancer decades later, the news barely made a ripple. On June 27, 2012, he died in Thousand Oaks, California, at just 68. There were no headlines, no grand farewells, just a brief obituary and silence. Don Grady was the golden boy who gave up the golden cage. He walked away from everything fans wanted and chose peace instead. His story isn't about scandal. It's about the quiet heartbreak of growing up in front of the world, only to be forgotten when the lights go out. Tim Considine, the first son who walked out and never looked back. He was the original, the eldest, the serious one. As Mike Douglas on My Three Sons, Tim Considine was the moral anchor of the family, level-headed, mature beyond his years, and always just a little removed from the chaos around him. But maybe that distance wasn't acting. Maybe it was a sign of something deeper, a young man already planning his escape. Born December 31st, 1940, in Los Angeles, California, Considine came from Hollywood bloodlines. His grandfather was a vaudeville mogul. His mother's family founded the Pantages theater chain. He was practically born into the business, and it showed. Long before My Three Sons, he was a Disney darling, starring as Spin in Spin and Marty and Frank Hardy in The Hardy Boys. By the time he landed on primetime television in 1960, he was already a polished professional. But 5 seasons into My Three Sons, Considine did the unthinkable. He walked away. No feud, no headline-grabbing scandal. Just a quiet exit from a hit show at the peak of its popularity. He wanted to write, direct, explore the world beyond the lens. And so he left, leaving behind a fictional family and an audience that never fully understood why. The truth? He didn't want to be remembered as Mike Douglas. He spent the rest of his life carving out a new identity, as an author, photographer, historian, and automotive expert. While other child stars clung to nostalgia, Considine refused to be trapped in the past. He reinvented himself, and he kept his distance from the machine that raised him. On March 3, 2022, he died at his home in Mar Vista, California, at the age of 81. No cause of death was disclosed. Just a quiet farewell from a man who had spent his life stepping quietly out of the frame. Tim Considine was never interested in playing the part forever. He didn't chase fame. He didn't cling to legacy. He walked out the door on his own terms and never looked back. Meredith McCrae, the woman who smiled through the pain and died without a spotlight. She was beautiful, articulate, and carried the pedigree of Hollywood royalty. As Sally Morrison on My Three Sons, Meredith McCrae wasn't just the pretty wife. They gave her wit, presence, and quiet strength. But what the audience didn't see was the woman behind the character, fighting for recognition in an industry that often refused to see past her looks. Born May 30th, 1944, in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, Meredith was the daughter of 2 stars, singer Gordon McRae and actress Sheila McRae. Stardom was in her blood, but so was pressure. She was acting by 8, on screen by 9, and pigeonholed by Hollywood as just another blonde with a pretty face. But Meredith had other plans. She earned a degree from UCLA, cut records, and demanded roles with substance. She wasn't content being decorative. She wanted to matter. My Three Sons gave her a sliver of that. Her character, Sally, married Mike Douglas and brought a breath of intelligence and independence to a show that had become heavy with tradition. Off-screen, McCrae balanced motherhood, activism, and a deep yearning to be taken seriously. She hosted public affairs shows, produced award-winning documentaries, and racked up commendations from Congress, Women in Film, and the American Cancer Society. She was everything the industry said she couldn't be: smart, bold, and more than just a face. But life wasn't kind. After 2 failed marriages and years of pushing against the current, she was diagnosed with brain cancer in 1999. Multiple surgeries followed. Complications mounted. Her brilliant mind swelled with fluid, and medications that were meant to heal her began to steal her away. On July 14, 2000, at just 56 years old, Meredith McCrae died in Manhattan Beach, California. There were no parades, no glossy tributes, just a few quiet headlines and a long silence. But for those who knew what she stood for, Meredith McCrae wasn't just a sitcom wife. She was a fighter, a voice, a woman who tried to change the rules of a game rigged against her, and who never once stopped smiling through the pain. Beverly Garland, the woman who refused to be background noise. She walked into My Three Sons with a fire most sitcoms didn't know how to handle. As Barbara Harper Douglas, Beverly Garland became the first wife of Steve Douglas viewers ever saw. A strong, independent woman who didn't just fill space on screen, she owned it. But that fire wasn't fiction. It was Beverly, and she had been burning her way through a man's industry for decades. Born October 17, 1926, in Santa Cruz, California, Beverly Garland wasn't handed anything. She started in small theaters, moved through risque shorts and B-movies, and fought her way onto the radar of producers who rarely gave women a second glance unless they smiled pretty and said little. But Garland didn't smile to please. She challenged. She demanded better roles. And eventually, she got them. By the time she joined My Three Sons in the show's final seasons, she had already made history as the first woman to star as a police officer in a TV drama, Decoy, 1957. Her presence on the show wasn't just about rounding out the cast. It was about breaking formula. She wasn't the soft-spoken housewife. She was witty, grounded, and unafraid to push back. And the audience felt it. Off-screen, she built more than a career. She built a name. Literally. Her husband, developer Fillmore Crank, named 2 California hotels after her. She kept acting into her 70s, appearing in everything from Scarecrow and Mrs. King to Seventh Heaven. And in 1983, she got her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one of the few women of her era to do so without playing the industry's game. But even trailblazers fall. After a long illness kept her out of the public eye, Beverly Garland passed away on December 5, 2008, in Hollywood Hills. She was 82. The news was quiet. Too quiet for a woman who had done so much. There were no sensational headlines. Just a passing mention, as if the industry she fought to change barely noticed. But we noticed, because Beverly Garland didn't fade into the background. She refused. She played wives, cops, rebels, and matriarchs, not because they were safe, but because they were real. And when she walked into a room, on screen or off, you knew she was never just someone's supporting role. She was always the story. Betty and Reese, the forgotten face who slipped through Hollywood's cracks. She didn't have top billing. She didn't become a household name. But for a brief moment in the fading years of My Three Sons, Betty and Reese appeared with a kind of quiet elegance that made people stop and look twice. She played Janet Ingram, a character few remember, but one that carried the poise and presence of someone who could have been more if Hollywood had ever given her the chance. Born in 1943, Betty and Reese had the looks, the voice, and the screen presence of a leading lady. But timing is everything in show business. And for Betty, the spotlight always seemed to shine just one step away. She made the rounds, guest appearances in countless series throughout the 60s and 70s, always professional, always polished. But she never got the role that cracked her wide open. Her time on My Three Sons was fleeting. A few scenes, a few lines, then gone. But it wasn't just a role, it was a reflection of her career. Always on the edge of recognition, never quite in the center. She didn't make headlines. She didn't have scandals. She simply worked, disappeared, and was largely forgotten by the industry she tried to serve. And then, in 2024, the quiet finally became permanent. Betty and Reese passed away at the age of 81. There were no breaking news alerts, no retrospectives, no sudden waves of tribute. Just a name, a date, and silence. But some stories matter precisely because they were overlooked. Betty and Reese represents the thousands of women in Hollywood who gave everything and got almost nothing in return. She wasn't a failure. She was a casualty of a system that only rewards a chosen few. And in her stillness, in her absence, there's a quiet kind of power. She reminds us that not every contribution comes with applause. Some just deserve to be remembered. The last goodbyes, when the cameras stopped and the family fell silent. My Three Sons sold a dream of family, of order, of comfort in a world spinning out of control. For over a decade, it was a sanctuary on screen. But off-screen, reality had sharper edges. The cast, so familiar and beloved, carried private wounds that no script could rewrite. Some lived long and quiet lives. Others died too young or too forgotten. All of them slipped away from the glow of prime time into something far colder. Fred McMurray, the patriarch America trusted, kept his life behind walls so high, no one truly knew him. William Frolley brought life to the grandfather we loved, only to collapse alone on a Hollywood sidewalk. William Demerest replaced him, not with sentiment, but with strength, and stayed standing long after the credits faded. Don Grady, the heartthrob, left fame early and died in quiet obscurity. Tim Considine turned his back on stardom, walking into a life on his own terms. Meredith McCrae smiled through the fight of her life, then vanished from the spotlight she once owned. Beverly Garland refused to be background noise, forcing her presence into a man's world until her voice faded. And Betty and Reese, barely remembered, never celebrated, remained a haunting symbol of how easily this town forgets. They weren't just actors. They were pieces of a cultural memory, now broken and buried. The family we thought we knew was never quite as perfect as it seemed. And maybe that's the real story, that even in the most idealized visions of life, grief lingers in the corners. So when you hear that old theme song, or stumble across a rerun late at night, know this: the laughter came at a cost. The family was fiction, but the pain they carried, that was real. Subscribe to our channel and join us as we continue to uncover the untold truths of Hollywood's most unforgettable faces. Because behind every perfect scene, there's a shadow that deserves to be seen.